Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a pretty full agenda today. I just want to start by thanking everyone for joining and to say welcome to this morning's session on home energy reports, titled Innovating Home Energy Reports to Meet New Energy, Climate, and Grid Needs. My name is Jim Stewart. I'm a principal economist at the Cadmus Group, where I do a lot of behavior-based and demand response program evaluation, and I'll be moderating today's session. So we've got three fantastic presentations today, and we're going to go in the order. On the agenda, and I'm going to share some slides quickly here. There we go. So each speaker will have about 15 minutes, and then we'll hopefully have a couple minutes for questions and answers. As we go along today, you can put your questions in the chat box, and I'll pose as many as we can to the speakers as we have time for. And at the end of today's session, we're going to have breakout rooms where you can engage with the speakers at greater length. Also, throughout today's presentation, we're going to have some questions for you, and I encourage you to respond. In fact, I'm going to pose the first question now, which is, when did you last receive a home energy report? And please use your chat window to respond, and never is an appropriate answer. If you're like me, you may have been working in this industry, working on home energy reports for 10 or more years and never received one. So please go ahead and let us know when you got your last energy report. While you're doing that, let me briefly introduce today's session by saying that home energy reports programs have been around for over a decade now, and they are a cornerstone of many utility energy efficiency programs. Their primary purpose has been to encourage customers to save energy, and they've been very successful at doing that, as countless evaluations have shown. But utilities are now grappling with new challenges related to decarbonizing their power supply, integrating more renewables into their system, preparing for extreme weather and climate change, and electrifying transportation and buildings. And therefore, they have new and urgent demands to increase energy savings, manage peak demand, and reduce carbon emissions. At the same time, the energy services companies that have been providing energy reports now have over a decade of experience providing reports and a growing amount of data with which to work. So they have the capability to provide energy reports with more personalized information, and that's more useful to recipients, and that can help to achieve new program administrator goals. So this session is about some of the innovations in home energy reports and how energy reports can help utilities meet the next set of challenges. So having said that, I'm going to introduce our first two speakers. So Julie Ahner is a principal marketing strategist at Pacific Gas and Electric Company, responsible for energy efficiency communications going out to their 16 million residential customers. She has over 20 years of experience in developing compelling and engaging communications designed to help drive awareness and action from consumers. Matt Luckey is an associate director of client success at Oracle Utilities and has a decade of experience working with utilities in energy efficiency and decarbonization space. He joined the client success team at Oracle Utilities, then Opower, 6 years ago. Since then, he has made managing the implementation of some of the largest and most impactful behavioral energy efficiency programs in North America. Julie and Matt are going to speak about how home energy reports have evolved at PG&E and new applications of those reports. So I'll turn it over to them.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And let me quickly share our presentation. While I'm doing that, even though I've managed some of the largest HER programs that exist out there, I have never actually gotten a home energy report myself, which is quite sad, but hopefully that changes one day. I too have lived in a lot of very small apartments in the San Francisco area, which is probably the reason why. So with that, we're going to get started. I'm going to start quickly, and then I'll let Julie introduce herself and PG&E as well. But as Jim mentioned, our topic today is how Pacific Gas and Electric Company, or PG&E, is rethinking behavioral programs to thrive in a future dominated by decarbonization and customer experience. We have a lot to run through today. Julie and I will be co-presenting this, so we're going to jump back and forth a little bit. But with that, I'm going to hand things off to Julie to quickly introduce herself and PG&E.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. As Jim said, my name is Julie Ahner, and I work for PG&E. I wanted to start this presentation by setting the stage as it relates to PG&E's customer base. We have a huge service area that covers 70,000 square miles with over 5.7 million residential accounts. That number, multiplied by an average California household size of 3, means that we provide gas and/or electric service to over 16 million people across Northern and Central California. To emphasize the magnitude of that number, that equates to about 1 in every 20 Americans. These customers span rural and urban settings, living in both multifamily and single-family homes, with over 40% on an electric rate plan that is based on the time of day they use energy. PG&E's service area also has a huge adoption rate for both rooftop solar and electric vehicles, leading the nation with more than 560,000 private rooftop solar customers connected to the grid and over 350,000 registered EV owners. This diversity, as you might imagine, brings unique needs and challenges when presenting energy efficiency to our residential customers, because there is not a single or even several solutions that work for everyone. I'm going to hand it back to Matt now to talk a little bit about our home energy reports.
Thanks, Julie. So just to start off from the beginning of our relationship between PG&E and O-Power, this relationship began more than a decade ago, and it actually started with one of the first home energy report programs anywhere in the country, a small pilot of 50,000 customers. And since then, we have grown to over 3 million customers in our home energy report program. And during that time, the impact has just been massive. A lot of you on the call, I think, are energy nerds, so you actually understand what some of these terms are. We've saved well more than 1 gigawatt hours worth of electricity, more than 40 million therms. Today, cumulatively, that would be enough to take all of San Francisco's residential customers off the grid for 1.5 years, which is just like mind-blowing, incredible stuff. These days, we now send about 10 million paper home energy reports to customers a year, and nearly 20 million email home energy reports to customers a year. And we have helped customers save hundreds of millions of dollars on their bills over the past decade. But a lot has changed since 2011. I think a lot of people think about home energy reports as very much just a vehicle to get energy savings, and they very much are a vehicle to do that, and they do it very, very well. But the program has evolved quite a bit over the past 10 years. So on the left-hand side here, you have a snapshot of what some of our first home energy reports look like. Since then, we have evolved to a second generation with a very different look and feel that reads much more like a story for the customer. Since then, we've even evolved and started sending home energy reports that are specific to certain types of customer groups. In this case, electric vehicle customers, where we disaggregate customers' EV charging in their home energy reports. And in the future, we're going to be doing a lot more there. But beyond just generating energy savings, home energy reports are also very much used as a communication tool today to talk to customers in a very individualized way. And what this has enabled us to do is very much create a very enriching experience for customers that has had impacts beyond just energy savings. And that's what that's what today's presentation will be about, is us unlocking 2 specific things: facilitating deeper engagement with customers in programs beyond home energy reports, as well as giving PG&E added relevance in a world that's getting ever and ever more complicated for utilities. So as I mentioned, what we're going to focus on today is a couple of use cases or case studies that are tied specifically to what home energy reports are doing beyond just generating savings. And one example is a case study we have run with PG&E several times over the past 2 years, which is using home energy reports as a way to drive deeper engagement with a home energy, an online home energy audit that they provide to their customers that is very valuable to PG&E. It's very valuable because one, it captures very important customer information for them. And two, they have actually measured real energy savings that come from customers who interact with this tool. But a fundamental problem that we ran into with this online home energy audit was that in order to do it, customers actually needed to log on to their PG&E web account. And as many of you likely know, logging in is one of the biggest barriers to getting any sort of customer action. So what we did is we partnered with PG&E in developing a technology to overcome this issue. And at a high level, that technology is very simple. In email home energy reports, we include a module that teases the customer a little bit, gets them interested in taking an audit. And what we have done is we have developed technology that allows us to embed in the call to action button in that module a completely randomized and secure token URL that takes a customer directly to an online audit that they can complete without having to actually log into their account. And the experience is pretty simple. You know, they get teased by this email home energy report, they click on that token, they're taken to an audit. It is secure, there's no personal information that is exposed to the customer. All they have access to is the audit survey questions themselves. And the impact of this has just been massive. So we've run several A/B tests on this in the past. On the left-hand side of this slide here is an example of us using a home energy report with just a normal link to the audit that requires a customer to log in order to complete the audit. And then on the right-hand side is a group of customers, identical, you know, randomized in an A/B test, where they got that embedded token that did not require them to log in to complete the audit. What we saw is for people who did not have that embedded token URL, 82% of them fell off after clicking on that URL to get to the audit because of that login barrier. None of them fell off when they received the easy audit experience. And in the end, this drove a 5x increase in the amount of audit completions that we saw through a campaign like this. And why is this super valuable? In 2020 alone, the Easy Audit campaign drove more than 30,000 audit completions for PG&E customers, which just on the energy savings side of things, it's nearly 2.6 gigawatt hours of savings and well more than 100,000 therms. So what this really does is it showcases that, yeah, home energy reports, they drive a lot of energy savings, but they can very much be used as a vehicle to drive customers to engage much more deeply with other beneficial customer programs as well. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to Julie.
Thanks, Matt. Well, the Easy Audit is exciting and we've seen great success with it. It's not the only way we're driving deeper engagement with our home energy reports. We use modules in both the print reports and the email reports to promote relevant programs to segments of our residential customer base. This includes programs available to income qualified customers, customers who rely on medical equipment, and customers who are eligible to receive a rebate for qualified products. Programs are not the only thing we promote within the home energy reports though. Last year, when many of our customers were working from home and seeing their energy use go up by on average 20%, we promoted some of our online tools to help customers manage and lower their energy use. This included things like our bill forecast alerts, which is a notification a customer can sign up for when they're on track for a high bill. All in all, we've seen that by including these modules in a targeted way, it not only drives increased engagement with the reports, but it also increases engagement with PG&E's programs and tools. Next slide, please, Matt. Another opportunity we see with the reports is to leverage them to speak to what is going on in the world. An example of this is how we adapted the messaging within the home energy reports starting as early as April 2020. At the time, we didn't feel very comfortable about going out with a standard report without acknowledging that things had changed and that customers had probably already started using more energy in their home. So we adapted the intro messaging in the reports that we modified over the next 12 months. This messaging just talked about what we were doing to help customers during this time and just acknowledging the fact that things were different. This messaging also complemented the additional pandemic relief communications we were sending out. And what we saw is over the course of a year, engagement metrics with the home energy reports went up about 10%. In addition, the home energy report program produced slightly higher energy saving numbers and equal program adoption numbers. We also believe that the changes we made to the reports contributed to a number of accolades we received from industry organizations for proactively communicating with customers during the pandemic. Next slide, please. In addition to speaking to the external environment through the home energy reports, we also leverage them to communicate other important topics for our customers. This includes things like our safety messaging and how customers can prepare for power outages. Again, all of this customization is using customer data to promote programs and communication that is relevant to a customer segment. And we don't necessarily have to send it out to the entire customer base if it's not needed. In summary, outside of being a successful savings program, the home energy reports are another channel we use to communicate to our customers on topics that are important to them.
Okay, thank you, Julie. So that just the conclusion. Home energy reports very much remain one of the primary engines of residential energy efficiency out there. I think we're all very much aware of that, and it'll continue to be that in the future. But as customer experience and decarbonization become more and more important to your customers, if you work for a utility, home energy reports are also a tool that we can use very much to reach customers in an individualized way and drive deeper engagement in other beneficial programs. And honestly, just to demonstrate utility relevance in a world that is just very much changing, especially in the energy space. So yeah, I don't know, Jim, if we have a minute or two for questions. I saw there were a few online. I can always address those, or we can move.
We do, yeah, if you want to go, yeah, if you want to go ahead and.
So a couple of questions. I saw there was one about in the easy audit, there was a lower completion rate after customers had started. The reason for that is when you do not have the easy audit and the customer needs to actually log in to get to the audit itself, that customer is pretty invested in it and was pretty determined to complete the audit. So they've already put a lot of effort into it. So you're going to see a very high completion rate once they've gotten through that login barrier. For the easy audit, we're catching a lot more low-hanging fruit. Some customers are clicking on it. They may not be that invested in completing the audit. So naturally, you would expect a lower completion rate. But overall, it is still way more beneficial to run the easy audit if your end goal is to get audit completions. There was another question about EV detection. So Opower and PG&E actually, we have this thing called Presence Discovery Live, where we can use AI to detect if a customer is charging an EV at home. Today, that does not power whether a customer gets an EV home energy report. We hope to do that probably in the next 6 months. Today, what gets a customer onto the EV home energy report experience is either you're on the electric vehicle rate plan at the time of use rate plan at PG&E, or you have taken this very audit that we are talking about and indicated that you're an electric vehicle customer.
Awesome. Yep. Thanks, Matt. And thanks, Julie. That was a great presentation. Let you guys close that out. All right. At this time, I'm gonna take a second to launch our first poll question, and you can respond in your lingo. So the first question is, how many home energy reports is PG&E sending in 2021? You've got 3 choices here. Give everyone a chance to respond. Anyone else want to? Okay, we'll close the poll there. Julie, do you want to let us know what the right answer is?
The right answer should be, it's about 30 million. So I think the option was more than 25 million.
That's right. Yep. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for participating there. Okay, we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Aimee Savage. So Aimee is a senior consultant at Resource Innovations, which is previously Nexent. She has extensive experience in estimating and validating energy and demand savings from large-scale behavioral programs, such as HERs and other neighborhood comparison programs, estimating joint savings across multiple energy efficiency programs, and assisting in the experimental design and sample selection for behavioral programs. So Aimee's going to talk about some research today that advances our knowledge about energy reports savings persistence. And I'll hand it over to Aimee.
Awesome. Thank you. Oops, didn't mean to click so fast. Hi, again, I'm Aimee Savage with Resource Innovations. What I'll be presenting is a study that we did with Southern California Edison to look at an HER persistence study, but specifically looking at which types of customers have more persistent savings. I think it's pretty well understood now that generally savings from HERs persist if customers have been treated long enough, so persist after you stop treatment. But we were curious to see if there are certain types of customers who maybe are better at maintaining their savings after they stop receiving reports. So just a quick overview of this pilot. So this was in a specific wave of HER recipients at Southern California Edison. The customers had been treated for more than 3 years with paper HERs. So our key research questions were, first, how long does the treatment effect persist after you stop sending paper reports to these customers? And on top of that, what is the decay rate of savings? So how quickly are the savings dropping off after you stop sending the reports? And then, like I said, which types of customers are the most persistent savers? And we also looked at how these results compared to findings from other studies. So just a brief description of who we're looking at here. So there's a few different treatment cells. So first, there's a paper-only, within this HER treatment wave, there's a paper-only group who have never received electronic HERs. They only receive paper HERs. Then there's a paper plus email group. So these are customers in Edison's territory who Edison has an email address available. So a key thing to point out here is that the paper only group and the paper plus email group are inherently different. So any comparisons between those two groups should be taken with a grain of salt. In this persistence study, the paper plus email group stopped receiving paper email or paper reports, but continue to receive the EHERs. So that's important to keep in mind. This was an RCT, so half of the customers continue receiving their reports, so that's about 66,000 customers, and then half of the customers no longer receive their reports, and there is also a control group that has never received the reports. And I've just included for reference, just so you can see the difference between the customer types. The paper plus email group, they tend to use a little bit more energy than the paper only group. So brief methodological overview. Some of the terminology that I'll be using: discontinued is the group of customers who no longer receive the paper reports. Continued is the group of customers who do. We used a series of regression models to estimate the persistence. So the way we did that is we first estimated essentially baseline savings for our continued group. So that's them versus the control. And that's our denominator when we're estimating the percent of savings that persist. Then we looked at the difference in energy consumption between the continued group and the discontinued group. So this is the change in energy savings that's attributable to the discontinuation of the paper reports. So we did this for the treatment wave as a whole, and then for various customer segments so that we could compare. So we use a lag-dependent variable model to estimate energy savings and the incremental energy savings. So if anyone's interested in regression specifications, there it is. There are three different periods that we're looking at in this model. So first is pre-treatment, so before anyone received anything. There's pre-termination, which is the year leading up to ceasing the paper reports, and then there's post-termination. So you'll see those phrases in some of the graphs here. So let's dive into it. So just to level set, to see what this looks like, here's these three periods, or some of the periods that I talked about. So we have the energy savings for the continued group and the discontinued group in this pre-termination period. So this was just things as normal. So the difference here between continued and discontinued is essentially zero. It's not statistically significant. And then we have the first year post-termination. So it's a little hard to see. Honestly, the savings persist fairly well. Maybe you could argue that there's a bit of a decline in the discontinued group, but it is very small. Finally, when you get into the next 8 months, we didn't have a full year available. You do start to see a little bit more separation between the discontinued group and the continued group. So the following few slides are going to have graphs that look just like this. Basically, what these are showing is the percent persistence for various groups. This particular one is for all customers in the study. We have those two different periods. So the first is that first year, and then the second is this next 8 months. If the level of persistence is 100%, that means that the savings didn't change at all after stopping the reports. And this is our 90% confidence interval. So in this particular case, because the difference isn't statistically significant from this 100%, significantly different from this 100%, we can argue that the savings are persisting here. So essentially what this is saying is that the discontinued group and the continued group, the difference between their savings is not statistically significant. And then it's almost statistically significant in the second 8-month period. So essentially what this means is that 98% of the savings persist for the first year after you stop treating customers. This isn't particularly surprising. We've seen this in other studies. I think in PG&E's territory, depending on which fuel type you're looking at, the savings are still persisting something like 5 years later. So in the first year, this is what we expected to see. In the second year, we see a decline, but still not quite statistically significant. So now we get into differences between customer segments. Each of these slides, if you're curious, includes some summary statistics between the two groups that we're looking at, just so you can see what their underlying differences may have been in the pre-treatment period. So keep those in mind. I think a lot of us know that larger customers tend to save more, and it's probably likely that larger customers tend to have more persistence. So this first comparison is between the treatment type. So as a reminder, the paper plus email group does continue to receive email HERs. So you can see that, it does look like the paper only group is having a larger decline in energy savings. However, the difference between these two groups is not statistically significant. It may be if we had larger sample sizes, but in this case, we did not. So we also looked at persistence by household age. And what we saw is that the group of customers that were on the older side, so 50 or older, did show a statistically significant decline in savings when we get to that second time frame. So that's the next 8 months following the first year. The under 50 crowd, it's a smaller group of customers, so much wider confidence bands here, more variability in their usage. So in the first year, it looks like they're increasing their savings. Probably not really, might just be noise. And in the second 8-month period, there is a decline there, but it's still not statistically significant. We also looked at persistence by household income. And in this case, the split that we used was under 75,000 a year and over 75,000 a year. So customers with incomes in the lower bracket had high levels of persistence in P1, but did show quite the decline in P2, which is that second 8-month period. So in that case, they're saving about 50% of what the continued customers are saving, but there is a pretty wide confidence band on that. The over 75,000 crowd, not much of a change at all. So it could be that these customers are investing in more energy efficient appliances, that kind of thing. So things that would lead to persistent savings. Next, we looked at persistence based on the customer's average load shape. So the way we did this is we looked at AMI data and looked at customers' 24-hour load profile on average weekdays during the pre-treatment year, so before they received anything. And we split customers into 3 different groups based on what their average load profile looked like. So group 1, which is the blue line, is sort of your typical residential customer. The peak usage is between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. Cluster 2 is this green line. So we're calling them our early users. They peak a little bit earlier than everybody else. And then finally, we have cluster 3, who are the late peakers, and they tend to be, they have a flatter load shape overall. So we compared these 3 groups. So typical users, early peakers, and late users. So here is the level of persistence for these different groups. So the typical usage customers, basically no change in their level of savings from pre-termination to post-termination. The early peaking, maybe a little bit more of a decline, but again, not statistically significant. And then finally, that late peaking crowd with the flatter load shape, once they got into their second year of not receiving paper reports, their savings did decline by a statistically significant amount to about 60% of the baseline savings. So we did a similar process to split customers by their seasonal usage patterns. So in this case, group 1, which is the blue line, is our typical user. Group 2, which is the green line, not very weather sensitive. They tend to use about the same amount regardless of what the season is. And then finally, we have our summer users. Those are cluster 3. So just to note this doesn't go from January to December. This is our pre-treatment year. So you can see they use far more in the summer and less in the winter. So in every case, we do see a decline in energy savings from versus the baseline. The typical seasonal usage people seem to persist the best. But again, the differences between these groups are not huge and they're not statistically significant. So in this case, I wouldn't say that weather sensitivity is necessarily a great predictor of persistence. Perhaps if you had larger sample sizes, you could argue that these high summer users have the lowest levels of persistence. And I think, yeah, that was it. I do have some slides in the appendix, but I know we were tight on time. Let's see, I can't see the chat. Oh, now I can.
Well, you're good. Yeah,
Okay.
You're right on, Aimee. Did you want to conclude, or are you done?
Sure, I'll go quickly.
Okay.
So basically, bottom line is the savings do persist for at least a year and 8 months. Edison did resume treatment for these customers with the paper HERs, so we're going to see if savings bounce back at all. That's coming in a future study. And I mean, really, the bottom line is we didn't find much difference between different customer segments. One extra little analysis that we did, and I'll just show the graph really fast just because I think it's interesting, is pre-termination, you have this bimodal distribution of energy savings. Post-termination, everyone sort of converges to this mean, which we found really interesting. But other than that, honestly, not a huge difference between persistence levels and different customer segments. I think further studies should use really large sample sizes because we are measuring a small effect on a small effect. So these things are hard to detect. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Great.
So,
Yeah, great research, Aimee. Really, really interesting. There's a question in the chat box about what types of actions customers are taking in response to home energy reports by income level. But there's a question here, I guess, when we're talking about savings persistence, about what is driving the savings persistence. And I was wondering if you and Khalid did any research about what the sources of persistence were.
no, not in this study. My guess would be investments in more energy efficient appliances, that kind of thing. People may have learned behaviors that they built into habits and continue to do, so that's possible. A survey would need to be done to really drill down into what's making these savings persist.
Okay. And then I guess one more question. This is from Matt. Did you overlay age with income? I imagine the biggest persisters are those who invested in the biggest, most expensive BTEC. I imagine age can also be correlated with wealth and home ownership, making it more likely you can invest in big tech.
Yes, we did overlay it in a separate analysis, which is in the report, which is on CalMac for this study. And because age and income were so correlated with energy use, the larger customers tended to have greater savings and greater persistence. So it's hard to say if that's because of their income and age or if it's just because they use more energy.
And then the last question I have is, are there any practical program design things that you can say based on your research, either design or implementation?
Sure. Something that I always recommend to utilities running HER programs is that you could do a staggered treatment approach where you treat a group for a few years, turn them off and let them coast. And while they're turned off and coasting, you treat a different group of customers for a few years. You don't need to be treating everyone always all the time because the savings persist so well that you could save a lot of money by not sending reports for years and years and years.
Thank you. All right. Well, yeah, thanks, Aimee. That was a great presentation. I am going to launch the second poll of our session. which is how often do you personally open mail or emails from your utility? So if you can go ahead and take a second to answer that. So we got a bunch of people who are pretty engaged with their utility. Quite a few that are less engaged as well. Just a couple more seconds here. All right. Well, at least in this group, it looks like we've got more engagers than more high engagers than low engagers, but it's pretty even split across the three responses there. But we had no one who says they never open their mail or email, which I guess is what you'd expect from this audience here. So, okay, let me actually, I didn't share the results. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so while you're looking at those results, let me introduce our final speaker, which will be David Zussman. So David is the program design and forecast team lead at Oracle Utilities. He began his work in energy efficiency with Elysian Energy, working on Empower Maryland weatherization programs. Since 2015, he has worked at OPower to design and forecast 4 behavioral energy efficiency programs across the country. So David's going to be presenting about a new application of energy reports to managing peak natural gas demand. I'll turn it over to David.
Hi, everyone. I'm David. Today, I want to talk not really so much about home energy reports as a product, but kind of about just the peak savings, peak gas savings that we think come from them, and how some AMI gas insights have kind of shaped our view, or are shaping our view of the potential value of behavioral savings for peak gas days. So I wanted to start out kind of with like 2 things that I see happening that point to like a larger issue. One is that residential gas usage is growing. This is in New York, which I chose because some of the AMI data that we're going to be looking at comes from the New York area. But I think this is a true trend in many jurisdictions, right? So you can see year over year, gas usage going up on the residential side. And then the second is that severe weather and gas infrastructure issues have led to some bad outcomes nationally, right? There were some famous things going on in ERCOT this past year, but basically especially with a focus on peak days, gas shortages can lead to really high utility costs, but also health and safety concerns. They can be particularly bad for vulnerable populations or households with poor building envelopes, that sort of thing. So it's something that I think increasingly is something that gas utilities are concerned about. How can we manage peak load or peak gas usage? And so there are like a bunch of options. This is not all inclusive, but I just wanted to kind of throw a few up here on this slide of like, what can gas utilities do about this? Well, they can build more capacity, maybe. They can, regulators can institute like moratoriums on new customers. That's not a great thing, right? Like you can have in-home installations of heat pumps or more efficient gas equipment, perhaps. And then, of course, we're here at BECC, so the main things to talk about are behavioral changes, and then maybe demand response as well, although today we'll be focused on behavioral changes. So there's a lot on this slide that I want to talk about, but this is kind of meant to like bring everyone up to speed on how behavioral energy efficiency programs work right now. For those unfamiliar with home energy report programs, right, we send out communications typically a few times throughout the gas season via paper and email with a normative comparison, and that induces people to reduce their usage in the treatment group. And then we have a statistically equivalent control group. We measure the difference between them, and that's how we get our savings. And usually we have a resolution of a month. And by resolution, I mean, we can see usage changes across a billing period in aggregate, right? And so we can break down savings over that month, but usually we don't know what the difference in usage was on a peak day. And so that kind of limits what you can see as a value of behavioral savings, right? If you're kind of averaging it across the month, but maybe there was a really high usage day. And so if you had like, what if your highest usage gas day was in the middle of June, but every other day was a normal sunny day? Like you wouldn't know that there were savings associated with that day, right? So on the right here, I have a chart that kind of shows the average usage curve for a lot of program years of data. So at Oracle OPower, we have a ton of gas programs that we've run over a decade and a half. And so we can get really good insights about, in aggregate, the impacts that we're having. And so I just took like a whole bunch of them and threw them into this chart, right? So we can look at therm usage across the year, and you can see it's really low for most gas utilities in July and really high for most gas utilities in January when it's cold. And you can see how our savings correlate across the year. I think this is what we can see today. So in a normal home energy report program without AMI insights, we can kind of already tease out that we're having a peak impact during peak months, and that it correlates pretty well with overall usage across the year. Maybe we're having a slightly bigger, overly pronounced benefit in the spring. That's kind of interesting. But on the whole, we're having a pretty correlative impact. And as a quick side note, if you are running a gas behavioral program and you're not thinking about our savings in this way, even at the month level, you really should, because right, we're not saving just consistently throughout the year. We're saving the most during the months when it matters. All right, so this is like a little bit of a preview of what's coming next, but like, what could we do with gas AMI if we had it? Well, we could do a lot of the same things that we already do on the electric side. So many of our electric home energy report programs claim some sort of peak multiplier on our summer savings, right? And when we look at a bunch of our AMI deployments across many, many electric utilities, it's something like a 1.5x peak multiplier. So you could imagine something similar for gas. The second thing that you could do with AMI in particular is like run a gas BDR program, a behavioral demand response program, where we're targeting a specific usage day. We know it's, the polar vortex is coming, like let's send out some communications and see what we measure on peak days. And then the third is, how could we shift usage off of peak? And that's something that we do on the electric side as well. Okay, so we have some gas AMI data. So I wanted to start again, just for this utility, with this larger monthly view. And again, you can see that there's a correlation between our average daily savings and the average daily therm usage in each month, right? So here in January and in February, when each household was using just a little over maybe like 6.5 therms per household on average during those months, right? We were having a bigger savings impact. Again, a little bit more pronounced in the spring, but still pretty well correlated. I like this view. This is the same thing, but viewed in a ranked order. So here's January and February all the way on the left. And you can see here I've just applied a multiplier versus the average. So if you looked at the average usage, it would be 1. And so in January, they're using a little over 2 times as much on average as they are, or they're using about 2 times more than they do on average across the year. And our savings correlate pretty well with that. There's a little bit of noise here, but pretty good correlation. All right, so these are the highest usage days. You can see the curve. This is the daily view. Each day, what was the average household using across the year? You can see the highest usage day was January 29th. And this is for this last gas season. And you can see that there are like big peaks and big valleys here. And so it's actually really important how do savings occur over this time. So here you can see how our savings correlated. It's kind of hard to get a really great idea of like what's happening in this view. So I provided an additional view, which I think is a little bit more useful. And what I did was we took the top 5 usage days in each month. And then we said, okay, how are our savings comparing on those 5 usage days versus the average savings across that month? And what you get a really good view of, I think, on this slide is like, when you look at the peak usage days, we are having a multiplicative effect. It's something on the order of about a 1.2x multiplier. So if you think of our savings on average across the year, on those peak days, we're having something like 20% more impact, which is really cool and very valuable. And then lastly, this is kind of like the intraday view. So this is every hour across the year. But we've done something similar here where we basically say, okay, if we focus on the top 10% of usage days, what is our impact like within the day? So you can see here, these bars represent the usage. And I've kind of highlighted in this yellowish color here the peak hours of usage during the day, which are typically in the morning when people are heating up their homes. And you can see that we are having this outsized impact versus our average during those hours as well. There is this other weird thing that we've noticed, right? Which is like we're having an outsized impact at night, which is interesting, not as useful, but this peak during the day is pretty useful in the morning. And so, okay, there are kind of 3 key takeaways from everything that I just said. So number 1, behavioral gas savings definitely correlate with peak usage. That's true on a monthly level, but I think the main takeaways from this presentation are that's true on a peak day level, where it looks like we're having about a 1.2x impact. And also within the day, there's this additional impact, a peak multiplier effect during those peak hours. And so I think there are some next steps for us, OPower, but also I'm interested in any feedback or thoughts that other people have. Number 1 is we want to work more with evaluators and regulators to capture the behavioral value of peak days. We think this is important to recognize and to make sure that we're working with the energy efficiency community to get the most value out of our programs. Number 2, we're going to be doing more analysis. So this is just one utility. This is one gas season, right? We want to look across multiple gas seasons, across multiple utilities. That'll help us get a better view of what these impacts really are and how reproducible they are. And then the third is that we are running some gas behavioral demand response programs during this gas season, which we are currently kind of entering / going through. So maybe next year we'll have some results to share on gas BDR and its impacts. And we'll turn it over to questions. I can see that there are people in the chat, so I'll try to answer these. Oh, this is a good question. So from Sarah, how has gas usage grown on a per customer basis? I think it's that more customers are using gas. AMI's advanced meter infrastructure. Thank you for posting that, Aimee and Claudia. And basically, AMI enables us to look at gas usage either like on an hourly basis or a quarterly hourly basis. So it gives you higher resolution into when people are using. Is the response delayed because bills shocked customers into paying more attention? It's possible. I think this question may be about why we saw more response in spring, like disproportionately, it seemed like. I think that's possible. I wonder if it has something to do with the nature of people modifying their behaviors, where perhaps people are more willing to change their behaviors in shoulder months. This is a theory that we have, right? Where, you know, in the middle of January when it's really, really cold, maybe you are changing your behavior, changing your thermostat setting or something like that. but it doesn't matter. It's so cold that you're generating heat anyway, but maybe those changes do matter a little bit more in April when it's only cold some of the time. And so maybe you're more willing to put on a hoodie and change your thermostat.
David, there's a question at the bottom there about how does your study account for external influences on gas usage, like utility rebate programs, like utility rebates changing to discourage new gas adoption?
Yeah, so because we're using a randomized control trial, that should cover for that sort of external influences, right? Like this particular one like has a pretty robust control group, so we should be covering for that sort of thing, right? So any external phenomenon should be covered by the randomized control trial because they should influence the treatment and the control group equally. Let's see, did I get to everyone? Hopefully I did.
Yeah, I think you covered most of them. I was going to ask, so going back to Sarah's question about how has gas use grown? I guess a related question is, are you seeing more interest among gas utilities in using behavioral change to manage periods of peak demand? Is that like?
Yeah, I think the thing that we have seen that is most different is a focus on peak, right? So, I mean, we've been running gas behavioral programs for a long time, 13 or 14 years, I think. And increasingly, the interest is not just on, how much can you save across the year, but how much can you save at peak? And so there are things that we've done on the product side to try to address that. But there's also this like measurement piece that I think has been a little bit opaque. And there are increasingly a few gas utilities that do have AMI. And with that insight, we can kind of get a better feel for what impact are we having at peak, which previously we couldn't really get because we were only getting those monthly billing reads. And so AMI has enabled us to kind of have this view of, oh, we actually are having a multiplicative effect. There were reasons to think that that might not be the case. So this is like good news. And that I think is the main takeaway for us here. And we want to make sure that we can replicate it elsewhere when we look at other gas AMI data, and also use that data to better inform our products so that we're either increasing that peak multiplier or replicating it at least.
Great, thank you. Well, yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, great presentation, innovative stuff. We're basically at the end of the hour. I want to, well, one, thank our speakers for delivering great presentations and staying on time. You guys made my job really easy. I also want to thank our audience for joining today and for participating and asking some great questions.